topic of pain, to be more specific, we're going to talk about the history of pain.
Yes.
Because as they say, if you choose to ignore history, you're failed to repeat it. And
Oh, my
pain,
favorite quote.
yeah, and pain certainly has a lot of really, really interesting history, some messed up history. Um,
Yes. I
and I
actually
guess,
have a fun fact to start that
oh yeah,
just
go
blew my
ahead.
mind yesterday reading this paper on the history of medicine in America.
Okay, share.
So um, we often look at things like we often look at what would be called as complementary and alternative therapies, depending on your ontological outlook, with with disdain and perhaps a little bit of comical. I can't think of the word. The coffee hasn't hit. My vocabulary is limited. So what is quite fascinating is to look at the culture from which things like chiropractic and alternative medicines particularly in the US, arose. And so one of the most like influential physicians or doctors in America in the 18th century and 17th century was a man by the name of Benjamin Rush. Now, he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Now, unfortunately, back in those days, medicine was not as evidence-based and influential as we see it now. And so he actually, like, directly quoted from this paper that I'm reading now from 1975, it was written, he said that everyone could be their own physician and could learn in just 6 months. And this was a gentleman that thought that there was not one disease that could not be fixed by a sufficient degree of bleeding or purging. And that form of medicine, ironically, became known as heroic medicine. And so it's from those grounds from which some people went, I don't feel like being bled for my flu to death, so maybe I might crack a vertebra or two and see what happens instead.
Really? So chiropractic originated from this.
Yeah, osteopathy, particularly osteopathy, like
Oh,
Andrew Taylor Still, he was
mhm.
like a couple of like decades earlier than DJ Palmer, the originator of chiropractic. And Andrew Taylor Still, father of osteopathy in America and perhaps the world, he just went, no, we can do this in maybe a less harmful way, which I find is a notable spirit. On looking at the origin of the rehabilitative professions, I've found arguably a morally upstanding origin for most of them, particularly my own physio. Um, Started by women to help those who are disabled. Of course, it's the more superior one, but what can I do?
I'm glad to see you and your bias hanging out together again. It's been some time.
It's been some time. I've kept it in the cupboard for so long, but screw it. We're
What
out
can
there
you
together now.
do? Star-crossed lovers. But yeah, I guess one of the things that's pretty helpful to think about when we look at pain through the lens of history is metaphors. Because when we're dealing, like the human body, like most other biological organisms, or all biological organisms, are complex. And so when we're dealing with something that's complex, usually we try to summarize the complexity into some sort of model, some sort of idea, or some sort of word. And we've had these words are these metaphors, these general ideas that we have about the human body. And I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at how these metaphors have changed through time, and also to talk a bit about what metaphor we're using now and how this metaphor is guiding us towards or away certain ideas that could be more or less helpful than the ones that we're currently implementing, right? So, because like if we think back in the olden times, like think Greek philosophers, or maybe even before that, like the metaphor that we had for the human body before we, went to town and started to dissect it, and we started to look at all these different individual parts, is that the human body was, it was just clay. It was like this some sort of omnipotent being had taken some sort of element and shaped it into what is now the human body. And from my understanding, and please add on more details if you know any, my understanding of that is that chronic pain a long, long time ago was viewed as either a godly retribution, like it was God punishing you, or it was God putting you through a test. Because if they couldn't find the source of pain, if they couldn't locate that in the body just by looking at it. And remember, they didn't have X-rays, they didn't have any fancy methods of palpation. They would just say, okay, your back hurts and it's been hurting for 8 months and it's not broken. Well, obviously, God is putting you through a test, or he's punishing you.
You are not at the favor of Yahweh. And what I find that fascinating.
Yeah.
In our history module from this pain course we've launched, we go into this quite well, and we look at sort of the variety of original interpretations of this, from Egypt to China to Greece. And as you said, we were just but the clay playthings of dolls. And I find that quite interesting, the idea of the trial or tribulation or punishment, because in a world of uncertainty and chaos and entropy, if we're given a reason for something, even if it's false, it's often quite a consolation, even if we're still suffering, I've found. Hence why many of us still latch on to, oh, there's a reason for everything, or there must be a reason for that, because it gives us a sense of somewhat certainty in this chaotic world. And so if God was punishing you, as horrible as that might sound to the modern listener, that to the person of the historic past would have perhaps been quite the consolation, because they had a way of framing their experience and going, okay, I can understand it now and I can do something. And that pain, the sensation that they felt, could have perhaps been re-perceived. And we talk about that more in the course. In Egypt, there was a little bit more intense, where they thought of it as these spirits that had entered the body from Sekhmet or Seth to punish you, when they entered through the nose. So they'd often try and scrape things out, as they love to do.
That's the cutest way of trying to get God out of your body. It's just by going through the nostrils. But yeah,
if anyone's had a COVID test, that's our modern equivalent.
Oh shit! Is that what we're doing? Is the COVID test trying to get God out of your body? But it's interesting if we draw that, if we think of that the consolation of diagnosis, right? Because we still do this to this day. I mean, there are so many diagnoses that are basically just words that we put on top of experiences, but that don't really describe anything. Just like saying the reason you're in pain is because of God, or a test put forth for you via an omnipotent celestial being. Right now, like, we have things that sound very accurate and
like T4
medicinal.
syndrome.
Yeah.
How specific is that?
Or lumbago, or patellofemoral pain syndrome. I mean, these are also words that sound very specific. Like, you can say, I have lumbago, but what you're basically saying is that I have a diagnosis that basically means that my lower back hurts. So we still cling on to these things. It's pretty much equivalent to somebody experiencing a drought and then go, oh, God is angry at me. I can't explain
syndrome.
But I mean, a little bit after, or actually, to be a bit more specific, if we looked at the Greeks, I mean, the Greek philosophers, they had actually some pretty cool ideas about pain. I mean, sure, they weren't as nuanced as they perhaps should be, but like Plato, he advocated that pain and pleasure went hand in hand. I think it was, I can't remember their name right now of the philosopher, but there were other philosophers who said that emotional pain and physical pain are basically the same thing.
Yeah, that was what Aristotle said. He put
Yeah.
forward that idea. What was interesting though is that was quite a contentious position.
Yeah.
I know people like Epictetus and a range of other philosophers at the time. Some actually put forward the idea that it was like a direct sensory stimulus, something what like Galen said, the man that you popularized so well, the physician of the Roman gladiators. Who we have to thank for most of our anatomy knowledge, or the beginnings of our anatomy knowledge. Yeah, it's this pleasure pain theory that actually survived for nearly 1600 years, or so actually perhaps longer, 2 millennia, until we get to sort of 15th, 16th century.
Mm. Yeah. But then, of course, we also have to give great thanks to another one of these philosophers, Hippocrates, our favorite
Yes.
philosopher, who ended up, who basically gave us or popularized one of these other metaphors. So, not the body being just a lump of clay shaped by a god, but that the body was more of a hydraulic nature, that it primarily not only consisted but operated based off of four different fluids, or as they call it, the humors, right? Black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. And he was the one that started this idea that, like you mentioned, oh, you don't feel well? Well, obviously there's an imbalance in your humors, these fluids. So how about we just drain you of a shit ton of blood and let's see what happens.
That works. And people argue that worked up until only just over 100 years ago, everyone,
Yeah.
just for their knowledge. Like the American Medical Association tried to start disproving that only at the turn of the last century, like, or century prior. That was a popular one.
Yeah, yeah, and that's it's pretty interesting to think about how long it took for us to kind of go, oh, we're harming more people than we're helping with this.
Even yeah, even royalty, wasn't it? Like you spoke about one of the kings of England, and he just kept being drained until he died.
Shit, it was an insane amount of blood they drained him of. I can't remember the exact amount of gallons right now, but yeah, they tried so many different things. They tried different enemas. They tried a bunch of different herbs, and like bird droppings was a popular one. Plasters of bird dropping that had like this
Oh,
acidic nature, so it started to create scabs on the head. Um, but of course, it was when they first started performing the bloodletting that they saw an improvement in the king's health. So they just kept on going and going and going. And this was after a night's sleep. Like they'd done a shit ton of stuff to him, bird droppings, enemas, torturing him, but by making him ingest all these horrible things. Then he gets a night's sleep, and then they drain him of blood, and they're like, "Oh, he's better because of the blood, not because of the sleep." So they just kept on going and going and going.
oh,
So
the
yeah.
infinite problem of correlation equals causation.
Hmm. And I mean, it's interesting to think about how long this metaphor of hydraulics, of fluids, how long it persisted, and how effective it was in creating the medical intervention that's lasted for the longest amount, or the biggest amount of years. For 2,000 years we did this, right?
Yeah,
And it was all based off of this idea: hydraulics, balance of fluids.
the
Pretty
strength of a
fascinating.
metaphor, and that really goes to show the strength of language, which is something that is of utmost importance, particularly in the current time when it comes to pain. Now we're seeing how much language affects us because of, I mean, of course, we're social beings, so the way we interact is important to our survival. So our nervous system plays it at high importance. But just the evolution of like metaphors has been fascinating to me, and I've been looking for this paper for ages. Like I've talked with a few guys, particularly Peter Stilwell, who wrote a really nice paper that we cover in the final week of the course about like how in each point in our history, the best technology we had at the time of the most advanced, coolest thing, like AI for us perhaps now, or computational, what do you know, machine learning, things like that for us at the moment. If we go back, let's say 400 years, it was the beginning of clocks and these kind of intricate mechanical networks. And then, of course, 18th, 19th century, the Industrial Revolution. In these points in time, we go, oh, what is the most complex thing that we've made? Yes, that must be how we work. Aha, I'm so smart.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, because of the complexity of our own experience, not just our bodies, but the experience of our bodies, we will automatically associate it with the most complex mechanism or invention of that time. It's like this delightful cognitive deload where we can go like, oh, life is a lot, but we have machines now, so now we're made of cogs and gears, and now we feel safe.
I am but a clock. Yeah, and that's what it gets really weird. Like, it wasn't until the beginnings of the 18th century that we began to realize that perhaps pain or sensations or nerve functioning wasn't just a photocopying of the spirit molecule that came through the incorporeal corpuscles, as Rene
Oh,
Descartes referred to them.
beautiful.
Yeah, I think he was a lover of consonants.
Hmm. Definitely. And beautiful
But
hair.
oh, beautiful. Yes. I think we've talked about this before, but I think the funniest thing about his existence was he was quite the wealthy man and a leisurely man and loved a good sleep in. Never an early riser until in his early 50s, late 40s, he was requested by the Queen or Regent of Sweden to come up and educate her in her court. And anyway, her lessons were demanded to be quite early in the morning, around 6 a.m. And 6 months later, doing this, he passed away. He literally died of waking up too early.
Oh, how resilient and yet fragile the human body is. It's, that's beautiful. Yeah. And I mean, speaking of Rene Descartes, here's another guy who investigated the body quite in depth. I mean, he wasn't the first one to look at the body, through dissection and vivisection. There were many people who did that before him, but he was the first guy to write a book about it that also included a new perspective on pain, the Cartesian perspective on pain.
Correct. One that he was so afraid of because of what he saw happening to Galileo that he didn't publish, and it was published after his passing. But it was a very interesting book, one that has so much depth it would require a course on its own, to be honest, from my research into it. But he talks about pain in this way, and it's probably ground zero for where we are now with our misconceptions of pain. The source of the tree of where we're at now is him and his ideas.
Mm-hmm.
He's got this drawing that I put on our course that's so just summarizes everything. It's this boy standing next to a fire, kneeling next to a fire, and his foot's just adjacent to it, and it's getting burnt. And there's this little line of a tube going from the foot to the spinal cord up to the brain. And he's quoted in his book like as saying, like a bell ringing at the end of a rope that's pulled, pain comes up into the experience. And it's like, I mean, we can't make a demon of him or make him like a villain of him, I should say, because perhaps that was quite advanced thinking for the time and what he had available. But that explanation, that A plus B equals C, mechanical, linear, Cartesian thinking was so powerful and I guess appealing to our tendencies as humans to want things to be simple, to want things to be a reductionist linear kind of pattern. So we stuck with that and we run with that pretty well. And that led to the specificity theory of pain, which hung around arguably to the last 40 years and still is around.
Yeah, I mean, from this from this one extremely elegant, and like you say, we shouldn't vilify him because it was probably a better option than many of the ideas that were pervasive at the time.
Yes, true.
But from this very elegant idea, we have now created thousands of theories as to why a person is in pain. Because this idea states that, and as he so eloquently put it, it's a disturbance, right? Pain is a disturbance that travels from an affected body part up through the nerves and then ends up at the brain. And so from this simple idea, we've been able to generate so many different interventions, explanations, solutions, and problems that explain why pain is there, right? And this could be, you know, okay, your foot hurts. Well, it's not broken. There's no bleeding. We don't believe that God is punishing you or putting you through a test, and we don't believe that your black bile is imbalanced with your blood. So, what about muscle length, or what about trigger points, or what about fascia, or what about your posture, or maybe it's strength. Maybe that's it, and so forth and so forth.
We just keep looking. It's like we're just trying to find the thing that's never really there. Down the rabbit hole we go. Like, and still to this day, I've had senior physios go like, and this is why I think it's so important to really come to a modern understanding of pain, because if you don't, the consequences are unfortunately significant. Because if there is pain in the foot and you're stuck with this, there's got to be a cause of a nociceptive tissue irritative origin, then you're going to go looking for something that might not ever be there. Like it, we're still getting to this to really explain it in a way that might ease the anxiety of the lay masses. But a degree of uncertainty and acceptance of that, I think, is required for all humans in this day and age. It's just this idea that we don't have to jump to a conclusion to explain everything, because, you know, in the Zen sort of way of explaining things, perhaps the question itself and just resting with it is more fruitful than jumping to an answer or a conclusion, because it falls short of what might be true.
Yeah, because the solution that we often give ourselves often imply that we have a problem. You can't have a solution without a problem. And the more specific and the more numerous your solutions are, the more specific and, yeah, the more specific problems you have, right? Which might explain a little why pain or musculoskeletal pain is such a big healthcare expenditure at the time.
Massive. Low back pain, I believe, is the biggest cause or origin of disability in the world today. And musculoskeletal disorders, when they're grouped together, are the second biggest cause of disability on a whole, to mental and behavioral problems, which is, of course, no surprise to, I guess, most people. It's just... Also, just to apologize, my phone will black out in the next minute or so, and I'll just have to quickly tap a button to stop that. So just, if that happens, my app is being annoying.
I am okay with living in uncertainty. Kind of. But I mean, now we've gotten to talk about the ancients. We've talked about medieval times. We talked about the Renaissance even. We've gone through clay, hydraulics, machinery, and I think it'd be a bit interesting to look at what, if any, metaphor do we use for the body today, and is it affecting how we're thinking about it as well? I came across a really cool example, like particular to what you mentioned regarding the most advanced or complex mechanism or idea that we have is what we're going to compare the body to. And one of our very complex machines are the computer. And oh, we might have lost Oliver now. He has
We're back.
yeah, like supercomputers.
Yes.
And I came across this really cool example from 2013. The EU decided to fund a project now known as the Human Brain Project. This project was proposed and spearheaded by this guy called Henry Markram. And this project had literally no restrictions and got funded with $1.3 billion in the hopes of it producing a simulation of the entire human brain on a supercomputer. Because if the supercomputer is the most complex thing we have, then surely something as complex as the brain can be simulated on the supercomputer. $1.3 billion. I'm going to say that again. $1.3 billion went into this.
That's a lot.
It seemed rational, right? Because the metaphor we used and that we still use for the brain is that it's a very advanced computer. So hypothetically, a supercomputer should be able to simulate it. 2 years after, in 2015, Henry Markram had to step down from the project, and it was described as a catastrophe, or officially it was called a brain wreck. And the simple reason was we relied on a metaphor. 2013, $1.3 billion. Right? The understanding that our brain works in the same manner as a computer needed to be abandoned because it simply doesn't process information like anything else that we know. It experiences reality and its own reality. It's not a computer. It's not binary 001100. So it's
even the idea of a quantum computer, like they probably went. It's such a. This is where I get really intrigued and also fascinated, because like where science and philosophy need to meet, because scientists or people investigating hypotheses like that one, perhaps we can, simulate the brain in a computer. Is that possible? They forget to sort of check their ontology and check in the process their epistemology and go, where is this even possible? Have we conceived of the world in a naive framing? And that is just, we're constantly doing that, to be honest. Like even I find myself falling back into the computational metaphor like it's a nice pair of shoes. And we will be using it throughout the course, but it is important, and I will have a caveat that, like, if this is the most complex thing that we know of, aside from the universe that we exist in, and perhaps, not to be egotistical, but perhaps the brain might be equally or more complex, then how are we ever going to reduce it or liken it to anything? To anything. And so it's just where one of the key problems, and we talk about this in the final lecture of the final week, where we look at this idea of enactivism, which comes from a wonderful man who's unfortunately since passed, Francisco Varela. He interestingly came up with this idea of enactivism, but he also was close friends with the Dalai Lama and attempted to unite the East and West into a scientific forum. And this man, enactivism is this idea that we are inseparable from our environment, and we can't, this idea of interdependence is very, cliche and cute to say, but if we really think about it, we are inseparable. Like our beliefs, our thoughts, our processes, reactions are inseparable from the environment we exist in, to the people around us, to the culture, the society. It's this pancake, again, to use that metaphor, where we can't split the flour from the egg once it's cooked. And trying to do so is, if you think of it that way, frankly, stupid. And we know that it's all together, but God knows how I'm going to split that up again now that it's cooked. So it's about just kind of zooming out and going, this human is but a chain in the link. And that's the most advanced and helpful way of seeing people and therapeutically analyzing them that I've come across.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us back to how we think about pain. Like how do the majority of us think about pain, and what are our assumptions, and what are the immediate ideas that arise when we experience pain or when we hear about pain? And it's still looking at things in isolation, oftentimes. Like some people are braver and they choose to talk about they present a linear narrative, like, your neck bone it's connected to your chest bone, your chest bone's connected to your, and then they come up with different explanations as to why your toe hurts, right? Because something here is wonky and everything's connected. But what if, and I prefer that much more than just blaming one body part. However, we probably should look beyond what only goes on in the tissues. Not because tissues don't matter, but because there's a lot of other things that also matter, that influence the experience and the emergence of pain. One being the brain. And like we just talked about, the brain isn't a supercomputer. It's something else. It's not computational. It's something else. It's not a machine. It's something else. And our brain is a part of our bodies. So maybe we shouldn't try to separate everything into these beautiful, neat little pieces and then come up with a solution. But instead, we look at the situation.
The context always matters. And that's something that's driven home from the very beginning of our course and from the very beginning of anyone's pain journey or journey with someone else's pain. And I think it's interesting though, like even the smartest people around us, I mean, two people I know of that I've learned a lot from pain through, both in person and through distant podcast courses like that, Mick Thacker and Lorimer Moseley. They're close friends, but Lorimer Moseley is quite a centralist or a neurocentrist, whereas Mick Thacker is often, tries to emphasize the peripheral side, the peripheralists. And so there's almost this split now, much like there was back in the 18th century between the intensivists and the specifists. And it's like, people like Peter Stilwell have written wonderful papers where it's like, hey guys, stop bickering, perhaps we're a bit bigger, but it's the role of scientists to get in the nitty gritty, to figure out the processes, because, not shying from that has led us to wonderful advances. But it's these philosophical rabbit holes that we can fall in and forget that or blinders, I should say, philosophical blinders that we put on in the attempt to understand something that we get stuck with. And then we forget we have the blinders on and, there's a bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the beauty and the danger of the old adage, the devil's in the details, right? Because you can discover a lot and explore very necessary things when you look at the details, but you often become enamored or even addicted to the details, and you refuse to, or perhaps you're unable to, look at what's beyond them. It's like if you have this huge plasma TV in front of you, and your job is to investigate one pixel to make sure that it's working, and all of a sudden you forget that there's a picture there.
Yeah, the wood for the trees, that old saying. Oh my God, it's such a human problem. So universal. That I guess it just comes back to that central thing. And this is the work of a man called Carl Friston, is a central piece of the final week of our course. And it's absolutely mind-bending, but also fascinating. This man is a psychiatrist and the originator of this principle, a mathematical statistical principle for how perhaps life works and how biological systems function. And this principle, scarily, ironically, has led to many of the artificial intelligent processes that we see today, the algorithms in Netflix and Facebook and Instagram, the people who've made those have gone to this man to understand this principle. And the idea is that we are inherently afraid of uncertainty, surprise, because that means that we have misunderstood our environment. We have to expend more energy to understand it, recalculate. We are but simple organisms that need to use the least energy possible to survive. Two main things. And so what we'll do is we'll use a bunch of different processes to minimize our free energy, the free energy principle, to ensure that we survive and we have the most accurate perception possible. Now, in that process, we screw up our perception a lot. We have these prediction errors as they're currently framed. Again, the limits of our language, the limits of our philosophy. We don't take it as the new coolest shiny diamond. It must be true. It's just our best approximation. But we are predictive, and so how many times at night, for those in Australia, have you looked outside and seen quite a curved shaped stick and perhaps thought it was a snake? How many times have we lost our car in a car park and realized that there's 500 other Toyota Corollas that are silver, and oh gosh, I've walked into one that's not mine? Because your brain is just going, I'm running on a software program that's, again, metaphor, I'm guilty. I'm running on a software program that's trying to just predict and have a model of everything that I think is happening, so that I don't have to pay attention to everything, because it is a noisy, busy, chaotic world. And if we paid attention to everything, we would have to sleep 16 hours a day because of the energy requirement and the processing requirement, to use that computational metaphor again. So yeah, we just try and predict and make up stuff to reduce our our energy expenditure. Sorry, I'm getting a bit lost with my words.
It's currently 6:41 a.m. at your place, so I will forgive you.
Yeah, thank you. On a Saturday morning, I kept the outdoor light on, so I didn't sleep well.
Yeah, but this, I think you're talking about a really essential point as it relates to how difficult it is for us to create a complete or more nuanced metaphor for the human body, which is our predictive analysis, right? Because unfortunately, and luckily at the same time, the world as we experience it feels incredibly real. And it feels like we are able to experience our environment almost in high definition, right? And it feels like we can experience our bodies with an insane amount of precision. And that's how many of these metaphors about pain, what they're based on, like, okay, I know my world, I know my body, I just don't know that one thing. So I'm going to now use my experience of my body and create a solution. But our perception, like you're mentioning, our perception isn't precise. Our perception of the world isn't a reflection of the world. As an example, like when I look at you right now, when I'm looking at my phone, like the only part of my field of vision that I can see with any degree of clarity physiologically is the size of my thumb. Or like actually just my thumbnail, that's the fovea, right? And that's the only thing that can actually discern things with the degree of sharpness that we think we can look at the world with. But it's only a really, really small part. And everything around me, I'm going to try to look with my peripheral vision now. Okay, I see a cup here, but this cup, I can't actually see the cup as a sharp image. I'm just making up an image based off of my previous experiences and my understanding of how shapes and shades work, right?
Exactly. We fill in the blanks.
Yeah. And maybe that's what we're doing with pain as well. Maybe we're filling in blanks.
And that's the hypothesis that's running at the moment. And I am really excited for the research that's going to be coming out in the next 12 to 18 months, because this imprecision hypothesis, as it's been stated by Lorimer Moseley and a notable pain psychologist from Belgium, Johan Vlaen, where we have just misperceived our environment, and what we would call, when we get to this point in the course, we'll explain it really well, but in this framework of predictive processing, we have three things. We have our priors, or our previous experiences that we conceptualize what we think is going to happen, and we rely on those. We've then got our posteriors, which is our, the event that happens in the moment as we perceive it. And then we've got the sensory input. And all of these three come together. And depending on what happens, we will weight our prior experiences more or less, depending on how precise we believe either is. So if I believe my prior experience is really precise because I've been in this situation before, I will predict that my cup is actually a cup, and then I'll pick it up and it's just, a bit of cardboard shaped like a cup. Ooh, I misperceived, there's an error. And so with pain, there's this idea that maybe the sensations that we are experiencing in our conscious awareness are prediction errors, where we've thought that something's happening that's not. And Lorimer talks about this really well in a TED talk. It's quite famous on YouTube now, where he had a leg scratch that was perceived to just be a leg scratch, but it ended up being a snake bite, nearly lethal. And so and we've all probably had an experience like this, where we thought something was something, but it wasn't. So we're waiting on the data to confirm that, but there's a sufficient amount of evidence to suggest that it's a reasonable hypothesis.
And it's so interesting to think about that when we think about, like you mentioned, our priors, like our previous experiences, how we use that to fill in the blanks now. Because think about how it was to have a wobbly, uncomfortable feeling in your lower back before you knew about anatomy, or even before you knew about trigger points, or you knew about the idea that muscles can be tight or weak, or you knew about posture, or before you knew about fascia, or before you knew about any of these ideas that have been given to us, sometimes imposed. What was that pain like then? How did it go away slower, quicker? What was the intensity of that pain? And I think that's one of the reasons, that's at least one of my reasons why I really want to do this course, is because it's not to talk down on all of these solutions, but it's to shed some light on how our previous experiences and our knowledge and our ideas fill in the blanks of discomforts that could have dissolved through time and some tender, loving care instead of fear.
Exactly. And it comes down to that fear and the threat. That's the most reliable mechanism we have, and we'll explore that really deeply. Because, for example, if you, before the dawn of all of these theories in your life, let's say as a 5-year-old, you had other ways of perceiving threat, and that was mainly through your support network, your mother and your father. So if you fell off your bike and experienced some kind of abstract sensation, that's unpleasant, there's probably a degree of tissue damage here. We've seen some children get up and go, I'm fine, and keep riding. And then we've seen other kids just break down in intense tears, and it's often related to how their parents react. And we know that parental experiences of pain are very predictive, or a major part of whether we will experience pain, particularly chronic pain. So if your parents had back pain of 20 years, then you get back pain. That experience is really important in your memory. So you're going to, perceive a much higher degree of threat, perhaps, than someone else whose dad just went, no significant tissue damage, you're okay, keep moving, like you're okay. I'm here to help you, but you're okay. Not in a like dismissive, abusive way, but there's a fine line.
Yeah. And just to answer Galeo's question here, yes, this is recorded and it will be uploaded later. Yeah, it's interesting to think back on your own childhood and how your interactions and your observations of your parents influence how you process pain. I started massaging my dad when I was about, oh, I'm gonna say 6 years old.
That's
And
adorable.
I am and I'm addicted to massages now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was the only one that was gonna touch my dad's lower back when it hurt. And I was like, whoa, I have magic hands. But I can't massage my own lower back, so now, I'm pretty much dependent on somebody putting pressure on certain points in my lower back at times.
Yep, that's a nice safety message there. And of such a oh my god, massage has been around for a long time. Just looking at the history of pain and everything, Hippocrates actually emphasized massage and movement to relieve musculoskeletal pain. So it's said.
Oh, he might
All
have been
goes back
onto
to the
something.
man himself. So
Yeah,
you can take solace in that.
but I guess it's time for us to do some mild and non-judgmental myth busting. So, like, because massages, they do work, but do they work for the reason we're being told they work? Because oftentimes when, somebody massages you, usually, like the most common reason as to why they're doing it and what they're doing and why they're helping you is because they're alleviating tightness, or they will go, oh wow, you're so tight here, and they'll massage that spot, and then it often feels better. But is that because they are in fact reducing the amount of tightness in a muscle? What are your thoughts?
Oh my god, there is a whole bag of myths with this one. Everything from fascia being released. I might start with that. So something like the IT band or most fascia that connects muscles. The barbell medicine guys are really good for this. They pose weekly. You can't be vegan to watch it, unfortunately. They cut a lot of meat up, joking about all these massage metaphors, but they're great for this one. Just releasing a bit of fascia here on my steak, but you can't do it. It takes it takes 4 tons to start to see degradation in the iliotibial tract in the band. And how many massage therapists have we come across in our life? Hopefully not too many, that have said, I'll just release your ITB. I've heard that at least 5 times in my life. Or, this even just the massage technique, myofascial release. However, when we go to massage someone or touch their skin, what the layers that we have to get through to have any effect on the muscle and fascia are immense. It's like rubbing on like 5 different layers of plastic. The friction, Greg Lehman's got a really good video on YouTube about this. It's a frictionless interface. You can barely exert pressure, maybe perhaps a degree of temperature, but that's arguable. There's another myth, and then I'll give you the best understanding I have thanks to a lovely lady called Diane Jacobs. But she's wonderful. The idea even that something is tight or out of place, like there's a common tool and technique in physio and in chiro of manipulations or mobilizations where we will press on one area of the spine, one vertebra, and perceive that area is perhaps tighter than another area. So C1, C2, or actually, no, that's impossible to push on, just C2. So let's say T1, T2. Remember your anatomy, Oliver, that would help. Then we have seen in the research that there's no agreement between the smartest of physios, no matter how experienced they are. We're talking 20 plus years of manual therapy experience and certifications, and Bob doesn't agree with Steve. So the inter-rater reliability is terrible. So what's happening? Well, thanks to Diane Jacobs, thanks to a bigger understanding of context, we are touching skin. And what's the most reliable sensing thing in skin? The nervous system. And it's all one big network. There's no separation. It all links together in a telescopic, like just even the tissue itself, it's a big telescopic network. Like I often explain to clients, like a tree or a root that you pull up and there's all these little roots going out. We have these little roots moving into our skin, hundreds and thousands of cutaneous nerves that are liable to, you know, a little bit of tissue irritation. And so you can get a little bit of a peripheral nociceptive driver perhaps, but then it always comes up to the decision of the central nervous system and brain to decide whether it's important perhaps. And again, this is a reduction. But if we're going, oh, I'm being touched by someone in a painful area that's creating a sensation that's more pleasant than the one I'm currently experiencing. I feel comfortable in this environment. I trust this person. There is a whole range of neurological and hormonal things happening where you are getting what we would call descending modulation of opioids and cannabinoids in our own body. That's a pain relief. Pain relief drug. David Butler says we've got our own drug cabinet inside of us, and it just requires the right trigger that we perceive, you know, is important, be it context, pressure, the person, the smell of the room, to go, oh, I'm safe, and then all of a sudden, boom, pain relief in that area.
Yeah, I really like what you were mentioning about what Greg Lehman said about how difficult it actually is to touch and to influence the things you think you're touching. Like one of my favorite examples, I can't remember who this was, but it was about when people try to release your hip flexors. This is one of my favorite.
Like this one is a big one.
Like, right, when they take their hands, and often they'll kind of like go full on Naruto mode, and they'll just jam it in. They'll jam it into your abdomen or like right above your pelvis, and they're doing it to release your hip flexors. And yeah, it was a colleague of mine in Norway who said, okay, so let's say that you're going to release the hip flexors by pushing your fingers in there. What's the first thing you're affecting? Like you mentioned, skin. What's the second thing? Well, what's under skin? There's a bit of fat, and then there's muscles there as well, you know, the abdominal wall, and there's some fascia, and there's some fascia again. And then what comes after that? Well, you actually have organs. You have intestines there. So what are you actually touching? Well, you're touching somebody's shit, first and foremost. And then, after copious amounts of organ and shit digging, then you will reach the hip flexors. So, okay, let's say that you're affecting the hip flexors, which, yeah, would require a lot more strength than the average human being, and quite frankly, a lot more weight as well. But let's say that you're doing that. You're also affecting all these other layers of tissue. And even before you touch your client or your patient or your friend, even before, you're affecting something, the human being. That happens even before you touch the skin, right?
It's so naive, the notion to even release the muscle in the first place. Like, not only is it like adventuring through the Himalayas to get to Mount Everest, is this effort to try and push through all of these layers of tissue and shit and organs to get to this muscle at the back of the pelvis that you maybe just gently touch if the person's got enough organ mobility and fascial sliding. The idea that touching that is what's required to make it go, ooh, I'm tickled, I'll get a bit longer now. Like, how naive. The nervous system is probably going, oh, this stimulus is interesting and novel, because stimulus that are novel arise in our consciousness as being important. And so even just touching the skin there, as Diane will often say, there's not much needed to exert a change. What if the brain and nervous system and the body is so complex and emergent and dynamic, we perhaps don't need to dig through shit to get a muscle to, or a feeling to change, because the muscle can be tight and we don't, and it might just be a feeling. The muscle might actually be quite extensible. This is seen quite a lot where we studied by Tasha Stanton, a Canadian physio who did her PhD in Australia, I believe. She was under Lorimer's research group and is just a brilliant researcher. She did this paper, and I think I've done a research review on this on my Instagram. Perceptual stiffness in the back. It's when you feel stiffness in your back in the morning, as I sometimes do if I've done a long yoga practice the day before. That is a perceptual inference based on the degree of threat. Because when we actually get scientific machines that test exactly to the precise neutron level of force, how much stiffness there is in these areas of the spine, it doesn't relate at all to the person's perception sensorily of what's happening there. And it can also be modulated by sounds that happen in the room as that machine is pushing on their back. So if we play a creaky door sound, they're going to experience a bit more stiffness or perhaps a bit of pain. It's like, get out of the rabbit hole you're in and see the bigger picture.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like you said, the degree of tightness that we experience does not correlate with the degree of tightness in the actual tissue. And another thing is that actual tightness, like tightness that we can measure by using fancy machines, doesn't correlate with pain, right? In many cases, it is the more fleshier and more softer parts that are actually more sensitive. So even like, number one, we know that we can't experience tightness with high precision. Number two, we know that tightness cannot be reduced by focusing on the extensibility of tissues. And number three, the places where you're actually tight, is not necessarily the places that are more sensitive. So it's like a triple whammy to kind of deep
naive sandwich.
Yeah.
It's this inability to see. That I think it's an inability to respect the nervous system. Diane Jacobs says it's like the muscle itself. What do you think it's even controlled by in the first place? It's like, what do you think's happening? It's like, don't go and talk to the factory worker on the floor in a giant, building working on one machine line saying that like, I'm going to make this work better just by talking to you. No, you have to go up to the management level to get some bigger decisions made, because in terms of, there is a hierarchy in the body of importance and control, and the nervous system is arguably, whilst being influenced by other systems, at the top of that. It drives us in the most potentially reducible way possible. So if we're touching, talking, interacting in any kind of way with another human, the nervous system is what is processing, working, interacting with that. So if we try to explain anything without including that firstly, we are just falling into a pit of falsehoods. Yeah,
and I think a really nice, and please correct me if I'm being a bit reductionistic here, but I think a really nice way of thinking about it is that the nervous system is what basically provides you with the experience of whatever you're experiencing. But the nervous system's ability to perceive everything is limited, right? It's going to present you with one priority at a time. And a priority might be something like, oh, you had a pretty long workout yesterday. So here, let me tell you. Like, let me explain to you that you're a bit tired and that your lower back is a bit tight. But if we provide the nervous system with something that is of an even bigger importance, that's a really nice way for us to make the tightness disappear, right?
I believe it was your first course, perhaps, that could be of aid in this problem.
Who knows?
a few spinal waves, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, a few spinal waves, or if somebody slaps you in the face. That's pretty effective, right? Like
Yeah,
you
that's
can
it.
easily substitute one discomfort with another. But the cool thing is, if the other discomfort that you're imposing upon the organism is something that you choose to do to yourself and something that culturally is accepted, then it's even better, right? I mean, let's take, because there is a reason why I think so many of us choose to impose discomfort onto ourselves. And we routinely do this. Like, think about foam rolling as an example, or trigger point balls, or hardcore stretching, right? We, we have this idea that pain relieves pain, or discomfort relieves pain. So if, let's say, my lower back hurts, and I did this when I was younger. Oh, that hurt. Um,
There's gray hairs on the side of your head, John, just to
oh
remind you.
shit. But I did this when I was younger, right? I had an immense amount of back pain when I worked as a dancer, to the degree where I couldn't walk. So one thing that
What?
I had was, yeah, I was out of commission for about 6 weeks. But one thing that I found solace in and a bit of respite in was a foam roller, a huge monstrosity of a foam roller. And I would roll the hell out of my IT bands. And lo and behold, I felt better. Now, the reason I rolled my IT bands was because I was under the idea or the perception that my IT band on my right side was too tight, and this was pulling the right side of my pelvis into a lateral tilt, which in turn induced a small lateral tilt or lateral flexion in my lower back. And this was the reason for the pain. So I kept on tapping. I steamrolled the shit out of my IT band, and I felt better. But now that I know a bit more about how hardcore IT bands are and the fact that you need to apply 9,750 newtons to see any degree of change in that IT band, now that I know this, I know that, yeah, it worked and it felt amazing. But it was because, not because I was doing anything to my IT band, and not because I was doing anything to my pelvis, and not because I was doing anything to my lower back, but I was doing something to myself. I was giving myself an experience that made me feel safe. I chose to do it myself. And also, it hurt so much. Like, I went through more pain than Mahatma Gandhi, and that was what I was focusing on. So my nervous system's order of priorities changed. It was like, we shouldn't really be focusing on this lower back pain right now because you are basically going Avengers Endgame on your IT band. So let's focus on
There's
that.
a lot happening right now. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, sorry for that rant.
No, that was good. That's I'm adding that to my pain story book. That's one of my favorites.
I went a trip down memory lane and it was full of pain.
The things we do to create a bit of certainty. I honestly think humans' biggest fear, biggest problem is uncertainty itself. And so if we, because again, if we frame it through that place of, are we in threatened or safe? It's like, yeah, if I'm experiencing a large degree of pain that's threatening my occupation, that's massive. And we talk about that in the course, where there's studies that look at like large cities where people were placed out of work and what happened to chronic low back pain rates. And lo and behold, they went up. So if we can, reduce the sense of threat, reduce the sense of uncertainty, even through further tissue damage and self-torture, we're going to do it.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It really is. Yeah, it's going to be quite exciting to explore these many, many different. I mean, because when we're exploring pain, we're basically exploring not just the human body, but our experience. And like you said, our worst fear is uncertainty. Our worst, biggest enemy is uncertainty. And looking at our experience makes us address uncertainty quite a bit more than if we were to look at the body. Because, I mean, the body is complex enough, you know? That's the beauty, I think, of the body for so many people who work with pain, is that we can kind of go, okay, there is a solution. And the more I learn about the complexity of the body itself, the more complex a solution I can come up with. And therefore, because it's increasing complexity, it must be right. But maybe it's not about finding something specific and complex. Maybe it's just looking at complexity of life instead.
And often the simplest solutions, a really close mentor of mine that I'm indebted to for honestly forever for my career, Robin Kirsch, is a physiotherapist from Australia that writes for the Physio Network, and does courses for movement teachers. Highly recommend. She and many others talk about how the body has, if we're a bunch of dynamic systems interacting, we are self-organizing. And she talks about we need to do the smallest little thing that's a novel stimulus that's pleasant for the person, that will just kind of smooth the rock a little bit, so when we gently push it down the hill, it'll roll and figure its own way out. We are self-organizing and repairing and optimizing. So it's the littlest thing, like the littlest stimulus. If I do a little bit more strength training, perhaps that makes the tissue contractile capacity and resilience a little bit better, and then I'm also perceiving myself as more resilient, and my self-efficacy is improving. It just creates this butterfly effect. And often it's the simplest things fed and appreciated from the most complex perspective that allows the person to continue moving with pain, or perhaps through pain to no or less pain.
That's a beautiful way of looking at it. Smooth your rock so it can continue to roll instead of trying to fix your car.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're trying to recreate the rock in its first place, thinking that you're that much of an It's quite egotistical to think that I'm that special, that I can do all these things to you. I am not the mechanic. I am just an interactor, a coach that can offer a perspective. Like Alan Watts used to say, he's like, I'm not trying to sell you on anything. I'm just trying to offer you a different perspective and that like it just leads to better self-organization.
Well, this was one of the more pleasant conversations I've had this week. So thank you very much. That was a lot of fun. And this is our last public Instagram Live. Now we're going to direct our efforts and our attention to the Pain Explained course. Yes. For those watching, if you're still watching, bravo!
Thank you for your patience and attention.
Impressive. But yeah, for those of you watching, registrations are now open. They will stay open till October 9th. And for those wondering if we're going to do this again, in all probability, we might also just do a static course. So there's not coaching, there's only the presentation of material. We haven't really talked about that yet. So we're going to have to see. But yeah, I look forward to this course. This is going to be a lot of fun.
It's one of the highlights. It's made 2020 much better for me. So yeah, looking forward to sharing and discussing and learning from everyone else as well.
Yeah, should be our motto. You thought that 2020 didn't suck enough? Welcome to pain science.
That's a great way to end this.
All right. Take care, Oliver. I'll see you later.
Thank you, John. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye, you too.